Welcome to 52 Miniatures. My name is Alex and this video is sponsored by Skillshare. In this video we'll be looking into my Stormcast, my custom Stormcast, the Samurai Gladiator Paladins. I want to share how to create custom Kitbash miniatures as well as coming up with a custom color scheme. A journey into how I paint miniatures rather than a straightforward tutorial. In other words, an epic tale from the hobby realm. Over a long period of evenings, hours here and there, I kitbashed these Age of Sigmar Stormcast miniatures. This specific unit type, Paladins, are hulking tank-like models not quite to my liking, and so I wanted to change them to my liking. Kitbashing is essentially using bits from different miniature kits, gluing together your own creation instead of assembling the one kit by the rules straight out of the box. I used the original Paladin kit together with bits from the Dominion box, bits and pieces from a Nurgle kit, some Horus Heresy Space Marines, and Gladiator helmets from Max Minis, also suppliers of Halfling Walrus Riders if you ever need them. The idea was to use the body, arms and weapons from the original kit as a frame and add to that. Losing the massive pauldrons and doing a head swap did wonders. Kit bashing is often about removing. I did use some other bodies, like the Stormcast Preators, but keeping the Paladin arms. This was trickier and did involve some epoxy putty or green stuff sculpting. This is my first ever sculpted chest piece. And for some reason what I believe is a Horus Heresy Terminator hand on the shoulder pad. I used some green stuff and tried to make my own chainmail by using a texture plate from Green Stuff World. Tricky stuff. I also, of course, used some of my custom shields. I've linked the video above of the story on how they got made. There you can find them as a free STL download. This one sporting a dragon scale pauldron made from the metal cut out of a soda can is a favourite. I mean, as you can see, I'm going for a more individual gladiator look. All individual warriors brought together in one squad. Tying them together apart from the gladiatorial look is the weaponry. This is an effective way of kitbashing groups of miniatures, finding a common denominator, like weaponry, to bring them all together. Like this fellow, who is mostly a knight Vexilor, but changing out the standard for the same spear as all the others are sporting creates a unifying look. And yes, that is a sci-fi power claw. Kitbashing is fun, a way to create one's own individuals and stories. I would have wanted some females in this group, but I was lacking bits. Already used most of them for the rest of the army. This gentlemanly groin protector is in fact a female Stormcast pauldron. And so evidently kitbashing between genders is sometimes difficult as female sculpts can be decisively smaller. Petite nonsense. So I've set out to paint these at home during Christmas break. Removing the YouTuber benefits of having a dedicated bunker for painting, I now faced a challenge. Priming in a snowstorm. But I've honestly never had problems priming in cold weather, if I follow a few rules. Warming the rattle can in warm water from the tap, making sure to shake vigorously so that all the paint inside warms up. Keeping the miniatures indoors until the moment of priming and then bringing them straight indoors afterwards to cure. Snow is obviously not something you want on your miniature while priming, as it is water. Frozen by some kind of pagan god magic up in the Nordic sky. I was lucky and there was a little pause in the downfall, praise the gods, enough to sneak in a prime. To block out the little snow there was, I built a little makeshift priming shelter and primed with a successful result. If you're wondering why I primed brown, well, honestly, it was the only rattle can I had in the house. Luckily, it will probably work okay for the scheme I intended. On the whole, it's better to have prime minis regardless of colour than no prime minis at all. I've not painted a mini for over 2 months and I was a little scared. Painting is so much a craft, and if you don't paint for a while, your hands forget what they should be doing with the brush. I was also concerned about the colour scheme. Gladiators, what do they wear? Leather, mainly, I'm thinking. But brown is not the most vivid colour in the box. I decided to paint one mini first as a test model. I had some new ideas to try out, as well as an urge to reacquaint myself with a bit of wet blending. Blending several paints on the miniature while they're still wet. I do have an old video explaining this method more in depth if you're interested. Linked above. To create an interesting brown, I blended in a muted purple and a favorite green-blue color in the shaded areas. Not really going for darker shades, rather a hue change. I imagined pretty much everything that would be touched by the light of an imaginary sky should be brown, and the rest more colder tones. I proceeded to paint on a layer of watered-down brown wherever I wanted the brown reinforced, and then painted on even lighter brown in a scratched-like manner, giving me highlights but also a sense of worn leather. John Blanche was right on point when he put red in grimdark, and it's something I keep forgetting but should be more mindful about. If one wants minis to stand out from a couple of feet away, colour is the way to go. Grimdark is cool, but the very brown and grimy version does not stand out on a tabletop. So for this army I vowed to use intense colours, at least on some bits of every mini, yet maintain a bit of grim. And for these, I'm going for a yellow, every gladiator's favourite colour. My grand plan was to wet blend the yellow as well, but soon gave up on this as the paint was too transparent. Instead, I focused on a base layer, sort of wet blending yellow iron oxide and a yellow from AK Interactive. I had a hard time judging the tone of the yellow and how bright it should be because of all the brown primer still visible on the model. So I covered everything I don't want yellow with a black layer. This made it a lot easier to appreciate where the paint job was going, and I could then go back and work on another layer of yellow paint. In retrospect, I should have covered the base in a layer of grey or something. That would have helped evaluate the paint job too, not having all that distracting brown all over the place. Yellow is notoriously tricky. I believe it's essentially down to the fact that yellow pigments, the essence of the paint, if you will, are rather transparent, and so it's tricky to make yellow paint that isn't transparent. So we swear over the fact that yellow paints are bad, but it's just the way of things, more or less. I also find yellow difficult to shade in a fun manner. For this I experimented and tried glazing on some of that blue paint I used on the leather. It's Chimera's Morning Sky and I love it. I'm no glazing pro, but I essentially watered down the paint a lot, pushing it towards the areas I want shaded, hopefully achieving a sort of gradient from yellow to blue-green. Because the paint is so thinned down, it will dry a lot less saturated, one of the reasons I find glazing difficult. I can't really see the effect until the paint has dried. But I find it nice to be a little bit careful and apply several very thin layers and work up the effect. Pro tip from a non-pro. I could then highlight the yellow with a bit of pale sand color mixed in, and that would have to do for now. I want to move on and see how everything will look together rather than fretting too much about details before I even know if the whole picture works. In miniature painting we talk about the ugly stage. A lot of the time everything looks a little ugly until the last minute when everything sort of comes together and finally looks like a painted mini. The ugly stage is a great stage to explore though. Are the colors right? Do I even like the scheme? Am I having fun? Should I just start another army with less fiddly bits? Maybe I should take up golf instead. I'm no great fan of metallic paints. The paints themselves as well as the look. Call me grumpy, but that's just the way of it. So I'm going to do a fast, not really, non-metallic metal. That's in relative terms. Fast would be to use metallic paint that I don't like, and I prefer enjoying my time painting. It's kind of important. The minis have a tendency to not get painted otherwise, and that would not be fast at all. Relative, you see. Anyway, a sketchy sort of non-metallic metal, i.e. trying to make the surface sort of look like some kind of metal by placing the shadows and highlights as if there were shadows and highlight reflections from a metallic surface. As I don't know how to do this, it's more of a "this probably looks cool" approach. I was then interrupted. My son wanted to paint orcs, or some of those cool trolls, Dad. So we built 2 gut rippers. Great name that. Complimentary with all the Stormcast in the Dominion box. And great minis for kids to paint. At least my son thinks so. While the plastic cement was drying, there was another interruption. A package, rather heavy. Transatlantic Games had sent me some of the paints from the expansion of the Too Thin Coats range. And so I made some space in my home-built rack for them. I've never tried these paints, so it was very nice of them to send me some to try. The first one to try them, however, was my son, and we were in luck. There was a very decent orc green. I was now banished from my paint station, told to not interfere, and moved on to deeper thoughts. I've always wanted to write a fantasy book. I read a lot, I write a lot of scripts, I have a lot of fictional ideas and stories, but never known where to start, dared to start, or known how to start. I joined Skillshare, the sponsor of this video, to see if I could find that start. And here I am learning from the pleasant Simon and his The Writer's Toolkit, 6 Steps to a Successful Writing Habit. Skillshare is an online learning community with classes on film, illustration, painting, writing, 3D sculpting, project management, and much more. I open-mindedly search for Write a Book, a nice and tight search. Because of the broad spectrum of classes and teachers, I found a class and subject that works for me. This was a start. I also started a learning path, a set of curated classes that build on one another. There's many, but I joined the Develop Memorable Fictional Characters learning path. In this case, 3 teachers, all authors, in hand-picked classes meant to be taken in order, introducing new things along the way, from novice to more advanced, if you will. A learning path seems quite helpful when wanting to progress and develop within the same subject. Thanks to Simon, I've now started finding ways that get me writing, and thanks to Daniel, Sabah, and Lindsay, I'm getting a grasp of what to write. Skillshare is rich in courses that could level up our hobby skills, like learning about color theory or drawing and illustration. The learning path for 3D modeling and animation in Blender is up there on my list. The first 500 to join Skillshare by using my affiliate link in the video description will receive a 1-month free trial of Skillshare, so go check it out. I'm glad I did, and a great thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring this video. My son's orc was finished. I'm rather impressed. This is not too thin coats. Well, it's their paint, but applied in single thick coats. Seems to work rather well in that application too. I painted on lots of layers of not really non-metallic metal. I'll get into the details of how this was done later, but this test mini was getting close to completion. It looks suitably gladiatorial, whatever that is, rather sketch-like, but it's a style I enjoy. But the point of this test mini was to evaluate. Test minis are great. While adding some final scratches to the leather, I made some decisions. The metal looks fine. I'll stick to that. The leather is cool, but I can exaggerate the purple and blue, and so I did. Again wet blending, but simplifying the process by using only 3 paints, the dark purplish, the blue-green, and the brown. I also decided to not paint any yellow on the lower half of any miniature. The yellow pulls in focus, and I want that to be on head and torso, the upper half of the mini, thus more brown further down. I don't like the cold yellow tone and changed out my AK Interactive pale yellow to a warm yellow. I think this is Vallejo game color, the old version. This time applying the yellow in simple layers only, no wet blending, starting with yellow iron oxide proceeding to the warm Vallejo yellow. I was struck by the absolute disaster of a paint this is. No offense to Vallejo, but this was like trying to paint with snot. So I revised my previous statement about yellow paint. Yellow paints are notoriously tricky, but some are worse than others, and the AK Interactive yellow was great if compared to this. I proceeded to a much more intense blue glazing as I found the test model a bit boring, and I'm after drama and excitement, a little story being told. But maybe I went too far. Comparing the 2 yellows, there is a massive difference. I certainly enjoy the warm yellow, but there is something here that's not working. I sat down and had a real thinker. I don't know how many paint like this, evaluating and changing their minds all the time. I do. A lot of the time, watching YouTube videos, these parts are not included. Maybe most others are better painters than I. Mind you, their videos are shorter too. Sorry about that. If you don't mind, please don't forget to like and subscribe. It really helps a lot, seriously. Anyway, this is when I found the scheme. And now that I think on it, it makes perfect sense. One thing was to use the purple as well as the blue in the shading of the yellow. This will create the same shadows as on the leather and paint a more coherent picture. It does at times turn into a bit more of a pearlescent effect, but I don't mind that. Secondly was to go for more of a saffron yellow, more of a warrior monk, if you will. It works better with the brown, but it also works better with the entire idea of what these miniatures represent, a color that works with the Kitbash. I removed the terrible Vallejo game yellow out of the equation and replaced it with some other warm, but for me more trusted paints, as well as making sure to notch down the yellow a bit, relying on the yellow iron oxide mostly. This worked out really well, I think, especially on some of the cloaks and other fabrics. I'm so pleased with this yellow that I'll probably paint my Kitbash hero, Industra the Gladiator, video linked above, in a similar yellow. Now for my first try with the two thin coats paints. Taking a step back, looking at everything as a group of miniatures, I decided there was a need for some deviation from the yellow. There's some great fatigue-type shades, I think 1940s uniforms, in the paint sent to me, and so I went for that distraction. I'm not going to ever review paint. Don't remember me saying that, please. But I think there is different paints out there for different folk. I really enjoy scale 75 paints, for example, and there are lots of people out there that despise them. Me reviewing a paint doesn't make much sense, as I'm just one person and not a collective hive mind, even though I'm sometimes as confused as one. Personally, these paints are not quite the type of paint I'm used to using. I like matte paints a lot of the time. These are not so matte. A little gloopy, if that's a word. They remind me of Citadel paints, I guess, that I also don't use much. But I mean, the paint was put on the Mini and it stuck there. I think the only thing that bothered me using these paints, a rather negative way of talking about paints, I know, but there we are, is that there was a bit of inconsistency in the coverage. A natural occurrence because of how pigments work, but it was more than I'm used to. Anyway, there's a fun range of colors in the paint sent to me, quite useful colors, honestly. I'll use these more throughout the video so you can be the judge. If you're already into the range, I'm sure you'll appreciate these new colors. As this video is already out of my hands in terms of coherency, I'm going to make things worse. I want to tell you where I believe the subconscious idea for the Kitbash minis, the color scheme, the theme for the entire army perhaps comes from. A series of 3 books called The Nevernight Chronicles, starting with Nevernight, written by J. Christoph. This is the story of Mia and her revenge on the world in general, and especially on the people that made her into what she is. Mia is a young girl who becomes a most prolific assassin, destined to destroy empires. Kind of what happens when raised by a murder cult, I guess. Her constant companion, the shadow of a cat, is a lovely character addition, by the way. The world this all takes place in is like a fantasy version of a classic empire. Rome, if you will. And in hindsight, this world building has affected my army quite a bit, I think. And not to spoil anything, but yes, gladiators are in there somewhere. Classic empires, grim and dark, gods and moon magic, and anti-heroes in an exceptionally fast-paced action-style storytelling. The books are refreshingly disturbing, as in a style of fantasy that is kind of the opposite to Merry Hobbits and that. Apparently classified as adult dark fantasy. I'll read you a bit of the foreword as an example. Parental advisory alert. People often shit themselves when they die. Their muscles slack and their souls flutter free, and everything else just slips out. For all their audience's love of death, the playwrights seldom mention it. When our hero breathes his last in his heroine's arms, they call no attention to the stain leaking across his tights, or how the stink makes her eyes water as she leans in for her farewell kiss. I mention this by the way of warning, O gentle friends, that your narrator shares no such restraint. And if the unpleasant realities of bloodshed turns your insides to water, be advised that the pages in your hands speak of a girl who was a murderer, as maestros are to music, who did to happy ever afters what a saw blade does to skin. My only reservation, I mean, I wouldn't recommend the books if I don't like them, but at times there's a level of, well, smut that almost feels more like the writer's desire coming through than something quite as necessary to the story as all the murder, bloodshed, and general nastiness that we all love. No offense meant, Jay. Anyway, if you're not overly sensitive, these are great, exciting, fast-paced fantasy books that I truly recommend. Great characters, worlds, and stories. What maybe grim, dark Warhammer should be in writing were the company not a children's toy manufacturer. So on the previous note of writing books, Reading them is a great thing too, and I find a lot of my inspiration for miniature painting comes from the written word. Give Nevernight a try. It's available as audiobook as well. As you would have seen during that little interlude, I painted all the black armor bits using my favorite Soulflat black, the shaft of weaponry using brown contrast paint, and the two unhelmeted heads using predominantly some of the paints that was sent to me. These two heads are actually a strategic gameplay choice. Each of the two squads of 5 have a leader that is slightly better in-game than the others. Keeping track of where they are placed is a good idea, and so to make them more visual to me on the battlefield, I gave them unhelmeted heads. Painting them was a, quote, simple, unquote method of thin layers of brighter and brighter Caucasian skin tone paints. I, as opposed to my son, thin my paints. I also tried one of the washes and one of the glazes. At a later stage, I also gave the bearded fellow a grey beard and some bushy grey eyebrows. And I never went into detail on how I painted the armor, so here we are. On the black, I painted on anthracite grey mixed with black on all the areas facing up, and that would be touched by light from an imaginary sky covering a lot of the black. I then go over the same area but with added chimera morning sky in the mix, just covering less, as well as paint on what would be visualized as some kind of metallic reflection effect. The next step is pretty much pure morning sky, again covering less of the area than before. This is very sketch-like. I'm not worrying about brush strokes. There's 10 of these models, and besides, I like brush strokes. I'm going more for this looks cool than any realistic non-metallic metal attempt, but I am trying to think a little of possible reflections, at least out of a stylized miniature painting perspective. I then add some Arctic blue to the morning sky, and I'm a lot more restrictive here, doing something more along the lines of edge highlighting, trying to achieve some kind of depth and shiny feel to the whole thing. Finally, we're at pure Arctic blue. This is just for the shiniest edges and the very small areas of uttermost bling. All the paints used in all the steps were mixed almost with equal amounts of water to paint to thin them down. But that is of course relative to the paints used and how long they've been standing around drying in their bottles. I did a bit of painting that I won't show in detail, like the weird monster heads this fellow is using as pauldron decorations, as well as other similar details on other minis. On all of them I used that dark purple, it's called black leather, but that's just a confusing name in this case, mixed in for shadows. This gave me the same feel to all the various details and made them fit into my scheme very well. Finally, the last highlights on the leather and on the yellow. I always try to leave this stage to the last instead of completely finishing every element completely. That's a lot of completely. Oftentimes I only get the full picture of the paint job once reaching this far, and it's only now I know how much I should be highlighting. To compete with the shine on the metal parts, I could do some rather stark scratching on the leather armor, as well as add a last touch of rather bright yellow on the yellow areas. In places giving me an almost metallic yellow effect. Mind you, I was very careful with highlighting the yellow. The last thorn in my eye was the shafts of the weaponry. As the rest of the minis were weirdly shaded with mixes of blue and purples, not having something similar on the shafts was nagging me, and so I added some watered down morning sky on the underside. These paint jobs have in their entirety in fact been an experiment in trying to create a feeling of shadow by changing the color more than the value. Sounds complicated, I know, but it's something I wanted to practice on. Apart from the extreme scratched highlights, the brown leather is not much darker in the shadows than anywhere else. It's just more purple or blue. The yellow is not massively darker in the shadows, just purple or blue. I must say every time I paint miniatures I forget how long it takes me. These took a lot longer than the imagined done over Christmas break. I don't know why I never learn. I also don't seem to be capable of making short videos anymore. I don't know why I never learn. I guess at least I tried to be efficient with the bases, sort of. The green pigment powder worked real well against the yellow armored bits, but that was not a conscious choice. All the miniatures in this army have a similar treatment on their bases. And after a couple of layers of varnish to protect these baddies on the battlefield, I'm now 10 miniatures closer to a finished, soon-to-be obsolete 2,000-point Stormcast army. Glory be the joys of Warhammer. I never went back to fix the first two versions of Yellow. A couple of minis that look a bit different does not bother me. I'm in this for the journey of painting, and I have no problem with the fact that a journey also has past mileage. I'm very happy about the saffron vibe. It feels like a scheme I'll be returning to. I'm also very happy that you made it this far. I hope you've enjoyed the video. Don't hesitate to ask me about any details I might have missed in the comment section down below. While you're there, hopefully giving this video a like. There's also a link to my Patreon down there if you're interested in supporting the channel further. I'd be very happy about that as well. Thank you for watching. Bye.